Well, the summer is coming to an end. And as most of you wardrobe watchers will agree, the best part of these days involves getting lost in a book. For many of you, you may be finishing up the Chronicles of Narnia for the first time, or maybe the 10th time. And like many of you, when I first read through the entire Narniad, I just spent weeks of my life immersed in a world that I thought would never end. And now, it was suddenly over. So now what? I couldn't just move on. I needed more stories, more surprises, more journeys into this incredible world that was so very different and so much more amazing than my own. Well, if you find yourself in that same place today, I'm happy to tell you that there are more incredible stories out there. And today, we're going to talk about one of the best kept secrets in all of fantasy and science fiction, C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. Now, you may have noticed that the title of this video says Narnia's Space Trilogy, and I don't want you to be confused. The world of Narnia is not mentioned in this series at all, but I am thrilled in the next episode to unpack a new, sort of unified field theory that ties together Narnia, the Space Trilogy, and even Tolkien's Middle-earth and the rest of Ardor. Now, if you haven't subscribed, you're going to want to smash that button because it's going to be a fascinating dive and probably my most controversial theory so far. But before we jump into that theory, I'm going to spend some time today laying out all the essential things you need to know about the Space Trilogy, or as it should more appropriately be named, the Ransom Trilogy. I'm also going to try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible for all of you who have never read the books. And as always, I want to give a huge shout out to the supporters of this channel on Patreon. They've been reviewing the script for this episode and even offered up some fantastic theories for the next episode, so thank you. Well, we're going to dive in deep in this episode, so let's get started. It's time to leave the Shadowlands behind and step into a world that's more real than our own. It's time to follow me into the wardrobe. Sometime around 1936 or 1937, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien made a bet that would change history. They'd been complaining about the quality of science fiction at the time, which was often very exciting and imaginative, but all pretty shallow and empty. They both wanted work that dealt with deeper issues. They wanted speculative fiction that pressed deep into philosophy and theology, and most importantly, that touched deep mythical chords. Here's how Tolkien later recounted that conversation. "Tollers," Jack said, "there's too little of what we really like in stories. I'm afraid we shall have to try and write some ourselves." Tollers agreed, and they flipped a coin to see who would write about space and who would write about time. And as the story goes, Jack, C.S. Lewis, got space, and Tollers, Tolkien, got time. And so it was out of this famous sci-fi wager that the Ransom Trilogy was born. Now, the books focus around the otherworldly experiences of a single man named Dr. Elwyn Ransom, who begins the series as an ordinary, maybe even a little boring, middle-aged college professor of linguistics. By the end of the series, Ransom becomes utterly transformed as the result of his journeys. Now, the setting of each book takes place on a different planet. The first book, Out of the Silent Planet, takes place on Malacandra, which we call Mars. The second book, Perelandra, takes place on Perelandra, otherwise known as Venus. And finally, that Hideous Strength is set on the planet Tholcandra, or as we like to call it, Earth. The basic cosmology of the Ransom Trilogy universe is laid out in Out of the Silent Planet. Ransom is actually plunged into this new understanding of his world when he's kidnapped and forced to travel to Mars, where his kidnappers plan on offering him as a living sacrifice to a terrifying Martian race known as the Sorns or Soroni. Now, a Sorn is a monstrously tall, slender, and gray, ghoulish-looking creature. Ransom escapes before he's handed over to the Sorn and flees on foot into the Malacandran wilderness. During his flight, he's befriended by Ahros, which is another race of creatures known as the Oyarsa. The Oyarsa are 7 feet tall creatures that are somewhat like a bipedal sea otter, with a snaky body, thick black fur, and heavy whiskers. It turns out being an expert on alien languages is actually pretty handy when you're stuck on an alien planet, and Ransom is able to teach himself to communicate with the creatures of Malacandra using a language known as Old Solar, a language that's actually common across the entire solar system, except for on Earth, and we'll talk about that later. He discovers that there are actually 3 species that coexist on Malacandra. The Soroni are the great thinkers, the philosophers, and the scholars. The Oyarsa are the poets and storytellers and artists, and the third species are called the Fifiltrigi, I think, which are the makers, craftsmen, technicians, and builders. Now, while there are other types of animals on Malacandra, only the Saroni, Oyarsa, and Fifiltrigi are collectively known as Hanau. That is, they are creatures with intelligence, free will, conscience, and most importantly, a soul. Humans are also Hanau. Now, as revolutionary as the existence of life on another planet was for Ransom, it was the discovery of the Eldil that completely turned his understanding of the universe inside out. This new cosmology would prove to be of a critical importance in adventures to come. So, what's an Eldil? Well, the Eldil are actually angelic, superhuman, trans-dimensional beings that usually appear to men as a brief, nearly invisible glimmer of light, but they're also able to take on solid forms if necessary. They're made up of a type of psychic high-speed energy, and they're native to interplanetary space known as deep heaven. However, the Eldil often travel between planets in order to aid the survival and evolution of the Hanau. Now, there's also a higher order of Eldil known as the Oyarsa, and these archangel-type beings have been given dominion over the various planets in the solar system known as the Field of Arbol. In fact, each planet has an Oyarsa who helps guard and guide the course of history on their planet, specifically the three rocky planets of Earth, Venus, and Mars, which are each in various stages of planetary history and civilization, ranging from the ancient remnant civilization of Malacandra to the absolutely brand new Perelandran version of the Garden of Eden. Now, most importantly, all the Eldil, as well as the rest of creation, acts in service to a being known as Maleldil. Maleldil is the supreme being, the great creator of all things, the center of the universe, who resides in deep heaven along with the Old One. When Ransom meets an Eldil for the first time, he learns that all of the planets in our solar system coexist in a sort of interplanetary community, where the Oyarsa from each planet regularly communicate and work together to serve and please Maleldil. However, our planet, Tholkandra, is not like the others. Thousands of years ago, our Oyarsa, known as the Bent One, the Dark Lord of Tholkandra, rebelled against Maleldil and started a great war in all the heavens. He was eventually driven back to Earth, and as a result, our planet is quarantined. The Bent Oyarsa's power cannot reach beyond the orbit of the moon. Our planet cannot receive or send communication amongst the other Eldil, which explains why Tholkandra is also called the Silent Planet. Now, our Bent Oyarsa's captivity has not stopped him from bringing death and destruction not only to our world, but to other worlds beyond as well. Eventually, the Bent One was even able to devise a way to infiltrate planets beyond his own lunar boundaries. That's why the most important part of the story happened long before Ransom's story ever even began. You see, Maleldil did not leave our wounded world to suffer in captivity with the Bent One. Instead, he did the unthinkable, the only thing that had never been done by any Eldil, by any Oyarsa, or even Hanau in the entire universe. Maleldil actually came to our planet and became a man. And as the Oyarsa explains to Ransom, when he died in the wounded world, he died not for men, but for each man. If each man had been the only man made, he would have done no less. In the end, all shall be cleansed, and even the memory of your black Oyarsa blotted out, and your world shall be fair and sweet and reunited to the Field of Arbol, and its true name shall be heard again.